An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
So welcome to Steph Therapy 911 with Stephanie Samuels, and today it is more than an honor to have Dr. John Violanti with me today, who has lovingly agreed to do the Zoom meeting, and he's being inundated. So I would give you his bio, except his bio is so long, and I've always felt like John doesn't really need to be introduced. I'd say that he's the grandfather of...
Grandfather.
Well, he's been, a few years back, I always said father. You're my dad of actually quite of really the research in police stress and suicide prevention, and kind of the foundation that people like myself and kind of everybody after you, John, has sprung from. And you are truly God sent. And
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. So, I was trying to think when I first met you, and to me, I don't know the year. I do remember that I had gone to a conference and you were lecturing and had me in absolute awe, and just thought, my God, this man gets it. So just having been honored over the years to be able to work with you, to be able to have you as a mentor, to be able to ask questions, to guide me properly, because you can be so misguided so quickly. So I know that you were a trooper, a New York State trooper.
That's right. I was.
So what I don't know is anything about you. Is how did you end up choosing to be a trooper? Where did you grow up? Were parents in the military, police? Kind of, how did you end up in that arena?
Well, that's a long story, as anyone's life is a long story. And I think it started when I was a young lad, and had some friends. I had this really tall friend. He's about 6'5", and he says, "John, I always want to be a state trooper." I said, "Gee, that's a good idea." I thought about it, and I said, "Well, someday I'd like to do that too, Mike." Well, as fortune has it, work was hard to find back in those days, and I finally got a job as a draftsman at Westinghouse Electric, which is no longer around, I don't think. And worked at that a while. I got tired of that and said, I think I'm going to get drafted here. And sure enough, I got into the service. When I got into the service, they put me in the military police. So I was a military police and MP for 2.5 years.
What branch?
I'm in the Army, and got stationed at West Point. Worked there, really enjoyed it. It was an honor to be in the country's military academy. Worked there for a couple of years. While I was there, I took the test for the troopers. And the day I got out of the Army, the next day, I started the State Police Academy. So it worked out really well for me to get in. I went to the State Police Academy, been all over the state. You know how it is with troopers. They get stationed, in the beginning, they get stationed all over the place. And I was in Poughkeepsie, I was in Fulton, I was in Fredonia, all over New York. Finally got back to Buffalo, worked there for a while on a thruway. During that time, I went to school and got my PhD, working midnight shifts for about 8 years, and did that, got my degree. But all of a sudden, I get a call from Albany saying, "Why don't you come to the academy? We could use you down here." So I did. I went down there for a while. While we were down there, we started the New York State Police Employee Assistance Program, myself and two other fellows. And it's still going today, some 30 years later. So that's about it. I have a great family. I got three children. They're all in education. My one daughter was a dean. She's now working in Nevada. My other daughter is also taking care of challenged kids in a school system. And my son's a high school teacher. So they're all doing very well.
And your wife?
My wife she was an IRS person for a while, but she retired. And she's been retired about 10 years now. I really enjoy retirement. I went over to, when I got out of the troopers, I went over to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and spent time there in the criminal justice program for about 12 years. After that, I came over to University of Buffalo as a researcher, and I've been there ever since. So that's my life story.
Had you grown up? Yeah. In that job. Had you grown up in Buffalo?
I did, except for the time I was away because of the military. I was in Buffalo most of my life.
Why did you pick psychology? So your PhD is in what?
PhD is in social psychology.
Okay. So you did bachelor's, master's, PhD all while you were on the job?
Yes, I did. Working night shift. Yeah.
Why social psych? What was it in how you were wired? That's not if I have to go, it's an interesting choice while on that job. I mean, certainly incredibly valuable, but what was it? What had influenced you to pick this field?
Well, I think it was, I don't know, I had this inner idea about kind of detecting people who were having problems. I don't know if that's an instinct or it's something that we probably know what I'm talking about, that we feel. And when I got in the troopers, oh my gosh, I've seen these people, some of my comrades who really got in trouble in terms of mental anguish, in terms of alcohol problems. And I said, I need to do something about this. I need to find a better way to help these people through it. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, you introspect. You look at yourself and you say, am I okay? Maybe I want to find out about that too. And you take a basic psychology course and you understand that it's quite different than you thought it was. And I started to enjoy that. And I just went on and on with that. Of course, the research part came later, where we started to get involved with numbers and seeing the high level of police suicides that were happening in our samples.
Had you ever sought counseling yourself?
Counseling myself?
Mm-hmm. Did you ever been a therapist?
No, I have never been a therapist. We did some basic peer support counseling when we ran the EAP program in state police. And I'm not a certified counselor, but we were trained in counseling. One of my master's degree, I forgot to mention that, but one of my master's degree was in counseling. So I did do that in state police. Yeah.
Did you ever enter into counseling for yourself
No, I never felt I needed it. I just felt, my opinion about life is, hey, it happened. Let's go on. I can't put myself down. I feel like I need to keep on going. And it didn't seem to affect me like it affected other people. I don't know why.
It's an interesting, kind of hear you say that, it's kind of the stereotypical cop.
Yeah, well, that's what I am,
True.
Yeah.
And yet what we try and do is we try and figure out how to encourage it. And then the other part, which is really interesting, is that foundation. Mm-hmm. So what is different potentially in your foundation where, the old expression, water off a duck's back, where somehow or another you're able to live in the here and now? It's interesting because we have all these new terms for things that we've been doing our whole lives. So that mindfulness. So you stay in the here and now, you realize that what's done is done. Yeah. And certainly I think for you is having the ability to be introspective, look at it and say, I need to move on. I need to learn from it, move on, do differently, do better.
Yeah.
So I think that probably the most poignant question is, how do we teach what was innate in you
Mhm.
to a group of individuals?
Mhm.
And with the whole resiliency component that's being thrown out there, is what skill set are people lacking? Because I think you'll find, as the researcher, and you and I touched on, which goes back, I know, I think you had quoted me back in 2007. I remember talking to you about kind of the profile of a cop,
Mhm.
what had gone on prior to the traumatic experiences, upwards of about 25% of my population. So that the resiliency, the survival piece is there. It's interesting. I had interviewed Dr. Beverly Anderson last week, and I had asked Beverly, much like you, kind of about background. I've known Beverly for years also, and she ended up telling me that she had grown up homeless.
Mhm.
That it was just this amazing kind of
Mhm.
piece that, and I'm like, afterwards, I said, "Have you ever told anybody that?" She goes, "Well, nobody really asks," and I thought, I guess that's true. So, and she's, and when you look at her and you understand her, that resiliency piece and the mindset is so clearly there.
Mhm.
But we are a sum total of all of our experiences. So we know this population is resilient, but how do they learn for the water off a duck's back?
That's a good question, and I wish I had an answer for you. But the way I look at this is, we're a sum of all of our experiences. And I think as children, if our parents, um, they're our models. If they show us how to deal with adversity, if they show us how to get through things, we're going to do better in terms of resiliency. A lot of the research in resiliency comes from that your youth, your being young, and how you were brought up and what you've experienced. A lot excuse me, a lot of oh, I'm sorry. A lot of young people, a lot of officers have been through adversity. And I always said this, I say this in my meetings, I think cops are the most resilient people I know.
With you.
You know, I mean,
Say the same thing, John.
they put up with everything and they do it and they get away with it and it doesn't hurt them. But there are those few, that it gets to the core. It beats the coping responses, and those are the fellows and the women who get in trouble. But I think it has a lot to do with your youth. If you had a nice youth, if you had a good youth, if you had adversity but you got through it, if you were perhaps homeless, or perhaps you came from a poverty-ridden background and you survived and you became a cop, and you're doing well now, I think that has a lot to do with it. How do you teach people this? Well, you wonder. I mean, is it innate, or is it something that we teach them? This resiliency thing has exploded in a million different directions. It started out as a psychological factor. Now it's, well, do exercise, eat right, and all of these other things that are wellness things. They're not resiliency. That's not what resiliency is. You know?
So what I really have kind of incorporated and it ruminates with me is the difference truly between resiliency and post-traumatic growth. Because resiliency really comes from just going through experiences,
Mhm.
really normally horrendous experiences, surviving them and adapting appropriate skills
Mhm.
in order to continue to navigate a world. So what's going to be interesting, that's going to probably go beyond our lifetime, is we have the new generation, the millennials.
Mhm.
So a lot of them have not grown up. Everybody's gotten a trophy.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
there should be no number one, because everybody who ever played should all be considered equal. And yet that truly isn't life. So now we stick them into a relatively heinous career, ill prepared.
Mhm.
Many of them have gone to school. They have learned to become independent thinkers. They have been indoctrinated into an incredibly liberal um, teaching, because most of our colleges are just liberal, not saying positive or negative, just stating what is.
Mhm.
And now they're going into a paramilitary organization where they're going to be given uncomfortable orders. And what do you pull from to do this?
Mhm.
So I think one of the nicest descriptions was kind of an earthquake in California. So you live in California, you know that you're in a location that's on, you know, some shaky ground there. So you live close to the San Andreas Fault, and all of a sudden, there it is. It's the 8.9 earthquake that there's just kind of rubble. You're trying to figure out your world. So the person that is resilient has got the MREs in the basement, has the water, has got, you know, the to-go pack, and has really been mentally preparing for when, not if, when this happens.
Mhm.
Whereas the other individual is just paralyzed by the fact that something so horrible could happen. That in the back of their mind, they knew that they lived close to the San Andreas Fault, but it had never been that bad before, and what's going to happen, but they really didn't. There's nothing that kind of made them realize that this could be reality. So what you find is the person that's resilient flourishes after the earthquake, and the person that has nothing to grab from most of the time becomes somewhat paralyzed. Now the question is, and waits for that person who's resilient to come save them. So now comes the ability. Who has the ability to have post-traumatic growth? Who can now use this earthquake and say, all right, I need to start digging. I need to find water. I need to find shelter for my kids. Like, this is primary. And I think we're going to see that in law enforcement is we've got I think we're going to have a tremendous dichotomy. We have a lot of people from the military that are now going in because we've been in conflict, you know, since 2001. So that you'll find that they will have the resiliency. And then you have the others that have kind of lived this
Mhm.
enchanted life that think, you know, being an officer is a great idea for whatever reason. And the two are going to meet. And it is going to be interesting, research-wise, to see suicide rates, see coping mechanisms, see all the different pieces that are predictable factors, you know,
Mhm.
anchors and insulating factors that are needed to survive, and to survive in what is now an insidious
Mhm.
world of law enforcement.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I agree with your idea about the young millennials and the young people coming into police work today. That many of them have never experienced any adversity. They've had a great life, and I think there's this idea in our society today about a utopia where you know, everything's beautiful, nothing's wrong. You know, I get a trophy every time, like you mentioned. And I find that very interesting, by the way. And they've never experienced the adversity. You know, I talk to some new police officers once in a while, and some of them, I talked to this one person, he never saw a black person in his life. Never. You know, a middle class, upper class, white family, great life. And he didn't know how to react to racial strife. He didn't understand the culture of the black African American. So he had a problem with that. And it caused problems for him on his job. And you get these young people that have never experienced that. About post-traumatic growth, how do you do that? You know, the old police saying, you suck it up, right? You don't do it that way, but I mean, you understand the trauma. Let's take COVID. You got people out there who are scared to death to leave the house.
Yep.
Because, oh my God, this little germ out there is going to get me and I'm done.
Okay.
And you have other people that say, I take all the precautions. You know, I've had a cold before, I've had the flu, I take all the precautions. I should be okay. So I'm going to go out and have dinner. I'm going to go out and have a drink. I'm going to go out to the movie if it ever opens up. And, you know, those are the kind of people that are different. If you have an adverse experience in your life and you're able to grow from that, you know, you talk about post-traumatic growth. If you understand that that's going to make you stronger, and you get these people that say, oh my God, I survived that. Wow, I'm great. I'm good, I can do things like that.
Right.
That makes a difference. But how do you get people to think that way? And you get people to think that way by telling them, listen, this is not the end of the world for you. This event, I know it's tragic. I know it hurts. I know it was bad, but listen, it's going to make you stronger in the long run. You try to teach that to police recruits today. But the question is, will they understand what you're talking about?
It'd be an interesting question to pose to the recruits, and have them not write down, who they are, is to be able to say to them, what was the most traumatic event in your life,
Mhm.
and how did you get through it?
Mhm.
Because that's where we look for the growth, is in that. And then it'd be really interesting to be able to follow them. It'd be interesting to be able to do that psychological autopsy on those that die by suicide, to see how many of them had prior military, how many of them had issues far before that. I know that when Schneidman was alive, one of the things that Schneidman loved to do was the psychological autopsies, was going back, was sitting with charts,
Sure.
and going back to childhood
Mhm.
to try and figure out the rudders. And I remember him telling this story. I had had him in college, and he was talking about an individual that had died by suicide, that when he was younger, I guess when he was in high school, he got frustrated in high school and was like, nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do this my way, blah, blah, blah. And ended up dropping out of high school. Then ended up realizing that he needed to get at least a GED. So gets a GED, goes to college, and in college experiences more adversity, and then ends up dropping out of college. Screw them, I'm going to do it my way. Ends up getting a job, goes from job to job, kind of same theory. Ends up getting married, there's a divorce, kind of same theory. Ends up leaving, and then ends up getting cancer. Cancer's not going to get me, takes his life. So it's kind of interesting looking at rudders to be able to see kind of what goes on with that, and what a person grows from. Hang on one sec, because I can hear the banging. Hang on. Yeah, I'm sorry. So it becomes really interesting to kind of look at the totality of how somebody handles their life, because as we know, past behavior is predictor of future behavior. So if we can figure that is the number one predictor of somebody who will complete suicide, prior attempt. So if we can figure out how they handled stressors, I think we start to unlock some of the keys
Sure.
to the predictability of future behavior.
Well, I think your idea is good about asking about the greatest traumatic or the biggest traumatic events in your life that really affected you in some way and how you handled it. So let's have a session with that, and let's go back and let's look how you should have handled that, or how you might have handled that to get you where you are today.
But to make them do the problem solving,
Mhm.
if we could bring you back in time with the insight you have today, what would you have done differently? Because I think part of what we're finding is that this generation hasn't learned how to problem solve.
That's right.
So, and I think that as parents, that parents have been remiss in not being able to tolerate watching their children struggle, being able to figure it out,
That's
being able to say, we'll keep you out of harm's way, but much beyond that, I'm not going to do. I remember my daughter wanted to quit softball. She was young, and I was at work. It was a Saturday, and my husband calls me up. He's like, Nicole's having a meltdown. Like, she refuses to get dressed. She's not going to softball, blah, blah, blah. She wants to quit. I'm like, okay. So I come home and I say to her, I have no problems with you quitting. I said, all about you quitting softball. It sounds like it's a horrible experience for you. And And I think that you should be able to leave anything that you're uncomfortable with. Like, just put on your uniform. Let's go. We're going to get you out of this. So we go there, and I said to her, Coach George is over there. You need to tell Coach Georgia that you are leaving the team. She's like, Mom, that's for you to do. I'm like, no. I'm not quitting the team. You're quitting the team. So this is something that is important for you to be able to tell her why you're quitting the team. And there she went off, horrified. And she comes running back about 15 minutes later, and she's like, I need my glove. I'm like, it's in the back seat. And she played right through high school. If I would have intervened, the most important lesson, I believe, would have been lost. She needed to take responsibility for her own actions and her own thoughts, and to learn how to express feelings of not being part of the team, sitting out, all those things that kids just like, screw them, I'm leaving. And parents are like, if you're not going to play my kid, I knew my kids weren't going to college on any scholarships. Love my kids, great kids, brilliant. They weren't getting scholarships anywhere. I mean, we were looking at the tuba at one point. I'm like, you got to pick something nobody's doing. But that's the other thing. They didn't get trophies for just showing up. So how do we teach if the parents aren't doing it? And I think that's what we're seeing is, we've got many two-income families. Who's raising the kids? Who's their role models? Is how do you deal? And I think we are the guilt generation of two parents working. And so we need to overindulge the kids to make up for the fact that they're either latchkey kids or, they're being raised by whomever. And yet we don't teach them the foundation, the true foundation of survival, of being able to appropriately have a voice and problem solve. So if you don't have that to grab from, what do you do?
That seems like the situation is. That's what it is. I think in terms of problem solving, I taught undergraduate students for almost 14 years at RIT in criminal justice. And what I tried to do is put them in groups to solve a problem. They couldn't do it. Okay?
Oh, God.
They couldn't do it. Okay, they can't work in groups. And the problem was they're so individualized, and so for some reason they couldn't come to solutions as a group. And it was interesting to me that what you're saying, I think, makes sense because it kind of applies in that situation as well. How do you make a decision?
And yet, officers are tasked with making a life and death decision inside of 1/100th of a second that is going to have lifelong effects. Lifelong. It's not just the legal system that they're going to have to go through. It's the psychological components that go along with that. If we have not helped them figure out how to deal with that, doing it after they've had to make that decision, when they haven't really been tasked with making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what are we grabbing?
There's nothing to grab. I think if you take a person, you put them in that job of being a cop, and they get involved in the shooting where they have to take another human life in a matter of split seconds, you're going to have repercussions for sure. I think, I don't know, we can prepare them. I think there are ways we can prepare people for traumatic events. We can train them ahead of time, inoculate them ahead of time in that academy where it's safe. Do it where it's safe so they get the feeling of how to do it, how they're going to feel when it really happens. Then when it really happens, at least there's some preparation of, oh my God, I took another human life. That's the most horrible thing I ever wanted to do in my life. It's against my religion. It's against my principles. It's against my morals. But I had no choice. And we had this Catholic brother in the academy once, and he said, thou shalt not kill is a commandment. He said, thou shalt not kill, comma. If someone's about to kill you,
right,
sometimes you have no choice.
And I think that's what people don't understand is that the only clean shoot in law enforcement is that your life was imminently in danger or somebody else's was.
Sure.
It's just not, hey, I made a decision. I thought this was a good idea.
it is truly the understanding that they need to come home that night. That is what it is, and that they have a set of laws that they have to answer to
Mhm.
in order to use deadly force. And I don't think that we can ever prepare anybody for truly what that feels like. I think you're right. I think we can inoculate for the act itself, but I don't think we can inoculate for the psychological components that go along with that.
I agree. You'll never know what it's like until it's happened to you.
Right.
And once then you'll know. Then you'll know your strength, and you'll know whether or not you're going to survive that.
So what I've found in my years of doing this and dealing with as many fatal shootings as I have, that it is not the fact that they had to use deadly force that screws them up. It's the getting visited by the ghost of Christmas future.
Mhm.
What would have happened if I couldn't do that?
Mhm.
And they then look at their lives, much like the ghost of Christmas future, looking through the window, and Tiny Tim's not there. That they are seeing their life without them. You're seeing their children without a father or mother. They're seeing their spouses. The sixth sense really hit me at the end
Mhm.
when she's having dinner, the anniversary dinner, and her husband's not there. It, it's that I have seen that just destroys them. Somehow or another, though they took the job knowing that they could have to use deadly force, it's after they do that they really understand their own mortality. So I think the other question, which would be really interesting to find out, is how many people that die by suicide have ever had a life-threatening illness or something where they imminently believe that they were going to die. Because you find that people never fight as hard to live until they know they're dying.
Interesting. Maybe perhaps if they had a life experience, where a near-death experience,
Right.
where they understand what it was like that at the point of death, and maybe made it easier for them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that, because I remember volunteering for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I was running a group, and one of the people said, um, he said to me, when you make out your will, you're doing it for the future. When something happens, here's the will. And he said, it's kind of, you're detached from that.
Mhm.
He said, when I made out my will, he said, I know that I'm dying. He said, it's very different when you know that this is going to be a document that's going to be read in the future, in the near future. And I've always kind of thought about that, is I know that that's true. I know that the mindset changes when you're doing certain tasks,
Mhm.
depending on what you've been through. So it would be an interesting piece to kind of really look at who does psychologically survive and why. And I do think we're going to find those threads of life experience prior to. And I think if we can, when I just trained for Copline out in California, and I was going on about the difference between kind of resiliency and post-traumatic growth, one of our listeners actually, who was doing vetting for role plays with us, came over to me. He said, you know what? I've never heard it explained that way.
Mhm.
He said, it really does help me understand how I got through my career
Mhm.
because of how he grew up. And so I think if we can get into the academies, and I think if we can help them identify their strengths, because a lot of times they are so removed, and that detachment is part of post-traumatic stress, is diagnostically that detachment. So that was a survival. Now what we want to task them with in the academy is to say, okay, we need you to revisit those events. We need you to actually connect to them, because
Mhm.
that's what you're going to be using.
Well, I think one of the problems in training is we talk about, you know what, you're going to get PTSD. You're going to get that. Not true. Most people do not get PTSD. And I think looking in this area of positive psychology these days, that hallucinogenic approach rather than a pathogenic approach. Well, you don't have to get trauma. You can survive this. All you have to do is think about it a little differently. Think about the fact that you're not going to get it, not that you're definitely going to get it. And I think we train on that negative aspect. We train that you're going to get PTSD and you're going to have flashbacks, and we tell them all of these horrible things that happens with trauma, but we don't tell them that it doesn't have to happen. You know?
I remember being pregnant. Not my favorite experience, by the way. Anyone who thinks this is the greatest thing in their life is really, I'd love to meet them. So I remember everybody saying, "Oh, your life is going to change. Oh, enjoy yourself now. Just wait to have a kid." Well, and I say this all the time to people when they tell me that their wives are pregnant, and they say, I know, my life is going to change." I said, "Let me tell you something. You are spot on. But what nobody told me is that my life was going to change, but my life is going to change for the better."
Mhm.
I said, I can't imagine my world without my children. Matter of fact, the only thing I've ever asked God for is if he's going to take either one of my kids, that 1/100th of a second before he does, he takes me, because I am to meet them. They are never to meet me. And I didn't have that understanding. I loved the cat. I was like, oh, cat's everything. Afterwards, I'm like, after 9/11, they were worried about, the poisoning of water and kind of the hysteria that went on there. I'm like, give the cat the tap water. My husband's like, well, I'm like, the cat's now going to be the guinea pig. If the cat dies, we don't drink it. They're like, but you love Tabitha. I'm like, I love the kids. It's a different perspective. And it's exactly right. It's looking at the coin in two different ways. And the answer is you're going to be exposed to trauma, but you've been exposed to trauma, chances are, your whole life.
And your life's not going to change forever. I mean, that's another aspect. Oh my God, I'll never be the same. Well, not true. I think, I think resilient people look at things, the change, pregnancy, for example, look at things as a new challenge in their life instead of a threat. And I think that's the big difference between those who make it and those who do not.
And then being able to train for, okay, so if you're involved in a shooting, so predictability.
Mhm.
So Professor Maltzman did a lot of research on alcohol. And one of the things that he tasked those of us that had to do the research to get out of UCLA and got to work for people like you for free is that he wanted us to come up with questionnaires
Mhm.
on where the person thought that they would relapse when it came to alcohol, because the predictability was so accurate on where they thought. So to be able to say to recruits, if you are in a fatal shooting, what do you think psychologically will go on? If you're in a non-fatal shooting, what do you think psychologically will go on? Because I think getting people to process, to have them think, this isn't a thinking group, particularly the millennials. We haven't tasked them with foresight or hindsight. So to really make them use what they have to then predict, do you think you're going to get PTSD? Well, you can certainly grow from all experiences. And we don't know if you would have ended up being a lawyer, if you would have, had a career where you weren't exposed to anything. We never know the road we didn't take. There is this fantasy. I always go over this. I'm like, your fantasy is if you didn't end up taking this job, that you would have ended up with this incredible career, made a ton of money, and kind of lived happily ever after. Well, what happens if on that path, on your way to work, you're in a fatal motor vehicle accident and, or your family wiped them out and you're the only survivor? Have you thought about that? And you watch their face. They're horrified. I'm like, well, you want to fantasize about what it's like. We only fantasize about the good. We idealize the road we didn't take. Well, I'm no longer willing to do that. I'm willing to take the road and look at it and say, should I have made that left-hand turn? I don't know if I'd be alive today because I don't know what was there.
Mhm.
So I need to deal with the road that I took and figure out how to do the best I can while on this road and believe that I'm where I should be.
And again, grow from it, get better. Jim Reese, you remember Jim?
Of course.
He was always, his comment was, don't get bitter, get better. And I think there's a lot of power in that.
There is.
You got involved in a shooting, you got the legal aspects, you got the investigations going on. It happened. it's over. Start to get back to your normal life and deal with it. It's not easy. I understand that. It's not easy to do these things. But you want to worry about this for the rest of your life,
Right.
that's not going to help you get through it.
But then I also say to them, okay, if you're going to worry about this for the rest of your life, which I'm okay with because it's your life, what is the benefit from doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Because we typically do something that benefits us, like what feels good. And then to kind of make them look at why are you choosing to stay here? And we know that relationships and relationship issues is a significant stressor.
Mm-hmm.
You, I believe, have managed to stay married to the same woman
Yes, 56 years.
for a lifetime.
Mhm.
How have the two of you managed? You shared that she worked for the IRS, don't know when she started,
Mhm.
but had a career. You worked midnights. Obviously doesn't make for a marvelous, normal relationship. You've had 3 kids. You didn't choose to have none.
Mhm.
How did you figure out how to navigate that?
Well, I think it's a matter of adjusting. It's a matter of cooperation between two people, and that's what we did. She understood. I mean, what cop's life is normal? You think about that. You're working the shifts, you're working the holidays, you're doing all these other things. But we agreed that we would work our problems out if we had any, and we'd go on. And I had to work nights, and she wasn't particularly glad about that, but she accepted it. I accepted her going to work in a day when I had to watch the children and wake up early. So, all these things, I think cooperation is very essential in any marriage, and understanding the other point of view. If you don't do that, you're not going to make it. And if you have to argue, make your point. Let your spouse make their point as well. And if you do that, you get through these things. You get through the hard times. And we lost a child. I mean, we've had hard times in the past, but we dealt with it.
How old was the child?
It was a stillborn child, and you can't replace that. You can't replace those children. But we had other children, and we're glad that our children turned out so well, and we're so happy to have them.
Communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Communication is really the key. So how did you learn how to communicate? Because there's a difference between talking and communicating.
Mm-hmm.
So where did you learn that from? Is that something that you saw growing up? Is that something you learned? Where do you grab communication skills?
Well, I don't know. It's a good question. I think it's a natural thing. If you need to understand each other. You need to understand the other point of view. If you don't get that, if you think you're always right and everyone else is wrong, you're not going to get anywhere in a marriage. And you see the divorce rate in our country is it's just learning about the other person. It's learning, their dislikes and likes. It's learning how to talk to each other. We did a thing for police spouses many years ago where we had the officer and the spouse sit in chairs, not facing each other, and try to talk like that about things. And they couldn't do it. I said, okay, turn around and face each other. So they turned around and faced each other, and they had an easier time talking. The officer comes home from work and sits at the table, and his wife or his spouse tells him or her all about the horrible things that happened during the day. The refrigerator broke, the dishwasher doesn't work, the kids came home from school, they had a problem with the teachers, they had no money. And the officer just sits there and goes, yeah, and then goes and watches TV and has a beer. Well, that's not communication. That's a loss of communication. And if you don't have that, relationship problems are not far behind.
I think it's not just learning about your spouse. I think the key is understanding yourself first. And if you can understand yourself, then you can tell somebody else what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't know yourself, it's going to be very difficult to be able to communicate that. and to be able to express what's really important to me. If coming home and having 30 minutes of a bitch-free time where not a problem in the world comes my way, because that's what I need. If that can be given to me, then I can recharge my battery and give. But I need to be able to express what I need, because nobody's a mind reader. I always say, so the way my husband feels loved is he wants a hug and a kiss. The way I feel loved is my center island in the kitchen needs to be cleaned. So when I come in and it looks like my house has been ransacked, that's it. And there's my husband. I'm thinking, you're not getting a kiss, you're not getting a hug. I'm like, you're not getting shit right now. That I need this.
Yeah.
So really being able to understand, and for him, he doesn't understand why that's so important.
Mhm.
Well, that will go back to what to me feels like chaos. That organization is really important to me, and having things that I can see. So sometimes you don't need to understand it, you need to just respect it,
Mhm.
and it makes it easier. And so if you can understand yourself, and being able for individuals to be able to list their needs, not their wants. There's a big difference between wants and needs, and people need to be able to differentiate between that. And then being able to kind of go from there. And spouses can absolutely say, I can't give you 30 minutes. I can give you 10. Like it's learning, as we talked about earlier, kind of that negotiation is being able to communicate and being able to problem solve,
Mhm.
so that you really can meet somebody else's needs. But you need to understand yourself to do that. And it's difficult. A lot of times officers don't want to go over their day, that they don't want to relive a lot of, the experiences they had. They want to protect their spouses. And I think that's a really fine line in being a healthy officer and protecting spouses. I mean, when I've talked about affairs, a lot of times affairs is not about sex, it's not about intimacy. And it's not about not loving the spouse. It's about not wanting to dump their shit on somebody they love. So they have this side piece
Mhm.
that they can talk about all the stuff that they have done and been through, because in some ways they want their spouse to be insulated
Yeah.
from that.
So,
And it's hard.
no, you don't have to come home and talk about the terrible things that happened at work. Maybe you can come home and talk about how you felt about those things. How was your feelings? Okay, yeah, I was wrestling with some guy, and he punched me in the face. And, he knocked me down, and I felt bad about that because I felt weak. All of a sudden, this guy took advantage of me, and he was only 5'2", and he beat me up. But I felt terrible about that. But if I just go home and tell my wife, yeah, I had this idiot that I had a fight, it's different. Express your feelings, and maybe your wife would understand, or your husband or your spouse would understand that how that was for you. Maybe they could help.
Huge. So that is something. So when you talk about in the academy, kind of being able to inoculate them to, shootings or what have you, that I think one of the more important pieces of that is it doesn't stop. And I think that's where we've been remiss, is it doesn't stop after that shooting. Is I think if we could train for the shooting and then train for the emotional conversation after it,
Mhm.
so that there's more of a continuation that's normal, kind of that muscle memory that we train for, in the academy for the shoot, is to try and train for the muscle memory for the emotional components and how to deal with them. So if after every one of those critical incidents that we expose them to in the academy, to do the debrief, to be able to then have the spouse, because not every department does debriefings or what have you, but to be able to teach our recruits how you talk to your partners afterwards. I had a shooting, ugly shoot as far as it was a gang member, very clean shoot, just horrible situation. And I was dealing with the shooter. We did not know whether or not the individual was going to live. And the guys from the department that were hearing about it would call up the officer saying to him, good, this MFer needs to die, blah, blah, blah. Great shoot. You got a scumbag off the streets. And I will tell you that in my office, that officer said to me, I have been praying that he lives. And he said, it's a game. He said, some days you get the bear and some days the bear gets you.
Yep.
And the individual did live, but it was really interesting to be able to go through that process with him.
Mhm.
And then to be able to go into academies and talking about that. And he ended up going into academies with me, because being able to tell the recruits, how do you talk to somebody? So he was never going to say to these guys, I'm praying that he lives, because
Yep.
it was shut down immediately. But what a difference it would make to be able to say, call him up and say, tough day at work today. How are you doing?
Mhm.
You know, what's going through your mind? Very different conversation. If we can teach that, that becomes the ability to teach about feelings
Mhm.
without having that, you know, those really cute emojis or whatever that go along with it. It's just, we need to teach them how to be human. We somewhat teach them how to become robotic. And now we need to, after you've survived this, is we need to teach you how to talk about it. We,
And, another thing is what you mentioned makes sense. I think those other people that says, hey, good shoot, you should have killed it SOB.
Right.
Let's train police officers not to do that.
oh yeah,
I mean, even if they don't want to talk about the officer's feelings who was involved in shootings, why say something like that? Say, maybe say, I'm sorry this happened to you instead. I mean, how hard is that to do? But you get these people who, the macho thing, and you get, he's a scumbag and you shot him and that's a good thing. I mean, these are things that should not be said.
Right.
Remember the old days when an officer got involved in a shooting and the commander would come in and give me that gun, get off the street, go out there and direct traffic. I mean, it's the same thing. Why bend the person's emotions any more than they've been bent?
and but we need to teach that,
Yeah.
because there's this misperception that there's something about it being cool to be the shooter.
Mhm.
You know, what I have found is that choir practice ends after a shooting for the shooter, whereas other guys, because when they go out to bars, they used to go out to bars, and they'd be drinking, and that the guys would end up with the Popeye muscles going, yeah, and I thought if that guy takes one more step, I'm going to blow his effing head off, blah, blah. Well, the shooter that's had to do that doesn't participate anymore. That's something that they can't tolerate, listening to wannabes, because they don't know what that is actually like, that they are making it out to be some type of wonderful event. And that's just not how it's perceived.
No, it doesn't affect people that way. I mean, maybe they think about it for all of their careers that, it's going to happen to them and they're not going to be affected by it, but they are, and they don't understand why they are, and they don't go to choir practice anymore. Right.
And that also needs to, be addressed. The other thing that people don't look at, that I find to be really difficult, is awards. So that you get an award for killing someone.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't tell you how many of my guys have to go up there and listen to the talking about this event, and they get Medal of Valor, Medal of Honor, whatever it is. And it is a constant reminder of the worst day on the job.
Mm-hmm.
They typically don't wear the award. They don't have it put up in their homes.
True.
And then streets are named after, many times, the officer that died. So I have officers that won't go on that street. I have spouses that feel guilty that they don't want to go to these fundraisers and all these events, and they're dragged around because the road to hell is truly paved by good intentions. That, gyms in the departments are named after officers. These guys no longer want to go to the gyms to see these huge plaques with their buddies' name on it. It's just a really interesting piece. And yet, if the awards aren't given, there's this sense of, I'm not appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really interesting balance, but really needs to be understood that this represents something that went wrong.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I think, we had this one trooper killed out on the thruway, and in front of the station now, there's this plaque, trooper so-and-so, or, and in the line of duty. So every time the officer walks into the station, what does the officer see? This plaque. And it's a reminder, that, oh my gosh, it could be me tomorrow. And it's the same with suicides. You get the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And even worse, you get this anniversary thing. Like a year later, let's have another ceremony. Let's talk, and it's over and over. And I know it's nice to be, seen that you've done this, that it's part of your job, but to be reminded every year, that over and over again is not good. That's not a good idea.
And that's, I found that one of my officers, actually you met him in one of the conferences, the officer who ended up having to take another officer's life, that we talked about the anniversary date. And he said to me, he said, please do not call it an anniversary date. He said, I have one anniversary. It's with the woman that I love. He said, I have an incident date.
Good point.
And I have really been quite mindful of that since then. And will kind of put that into anybody's mind to please, because that anniversary then has a negative connotation when it's with somebody you love.
Right.
So that was important. And yeah, I mean, I know the empty chair, it has been, that is done out of love and honor and all of that. But to go into a roll call room with that empty chair is brutal for those officers.
Sure.
So, have you ever lost anybody to suicide?
No, I have not. No. I mean, I've lost some comrades, some other troopers, but not my family. No.
Yeah.
But I understand. That even losing those people, affected me in some way, because they were troopers, they were cops. So that bothers you, and you understand that. Why did that happen? And could that happen to me? Could it happen to me? And you have to think about it. So it's just one of those things. People who are, the job is cohesive. It's everyone is in the same boat on this job. So when this negative thing happens to one person, we all feel it.
Yes, there's that question of, can it happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is what did I miss? I know I've been asked, or I've been with Copline and it's done well. And people have said, it's amazing. You save lives, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's me. I don't look at that. I look at those that I didn't save. Like I look at when that suicide happens, I think, what didn't we put out there? What didn't we get to this officer? And I know that that's not a reasonable, logical thought process. But yet I keep thinking, if they only would have called. But that's just it. That ambivalence is what dials 10 numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when people freak out about, so we made Copline a non-rescue line so that we don't ping phones, we don't trace calls, because we know if we do, who are we sending to your home? Another cop. So the good of the one does not outweigh the good of the many, because the cop that shows up at your house now is going back to his department saying, don't ever call them, because this is what ends up happening. But what we also know is of the 7,500,000 calls to a suicide hotline, Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Hotline, 2 people have died by suicide on those lines. Well, so what do we know? So now we don't know who died afterwards, but what we do know is that they're not calling the lines to die. So we need to take that away. We need to be able to make sure that they know that they're allowed to talk about suicide. We had a call the other day, and the person was talking, and listener, they're great. And the person had said on the line, I just, I think about getting into a motor vehicle accident and this just being over with. And the listener said, how long have you been thinking about killing yourself? And he said, the caller was so elated to be able to talk about the suicidal ideation and the thoughts of it. And that's what people don't realize. Like, I think about sex ed. So when we were growing up, the parents' belief was, if you talk about sex, your kids are going to have it, so don't talk about it. So I'm not quite sure where the teen pregnancy had come from, if nobody was talking about it. But what we ended up learning was we not only need to talk about, we need to start really early. So we kind of talked good touch, bad touch when the kids are in elementary school, and you've got middle school, and it kind of goes from there. What happens if we did the same thing with depression, with anxiety, with kind of the etiologies to suicide? What happens if we absolutely talked about it? Wouldn't that be the same as sex ed?
Well, we're starting to do that. I mean, we've broken the barrier. I think in policing, we finally got to a point where they're talking about it, and I think that's very good.
Yeah.
Talk about starting early. Children. I mean, the suicide rate among young teenagers is horrible. It is very high. Maybe in the education system, we ought to start talking about that.
Yeah.
And with young children, you can talk to them about that in a storytelling way. Like talk about the goose or the spider or whatever. You can make that into a children's story and make it not threatening to them. I think parents might get a little upset with you, but I think that's a good place to start. And as they grow up, they're going to have a better understanding of what that is, and how it feels to be depressed and so forth.
And that whole thing that you and I spoke about, problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to teach others on how do you ask somebody, you seem sad today. To be able to say, is
Mm-hmm.
something going on?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the pieces that if we can make that impact, I think that we can see it long term. What has been your greatest achievement?
Well, I've had a few. I think I really can't name one. I think it's been my greatest achievement was to make people aware of the psychological difficulties connected with police work. When I left police work, I decided that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to reduce the suicide rate in policing, and I'm going to do that by doing scientific research. And I'm not going to come out and make a big splash with no data on how to do that. I want to show you in black and white and in numbers what this problem is. It took a long time, and we're still working on it, but it's getting there. So I think that was one of my biggest achievements in life. I enjoy doing research, and I think when you present scientific evidence instead of anecdotal evidence, that you get further. Unfortunately, we have a lot of both out there, and I think we need to sort through it and get a better idea. But yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's my goal to be, I guess, for the rest of my life now, just to reduce and stop this problem.
Greatest disappointment?
Am I disappointed?
No, what has been your greatest disappointment?
Oh, I can't really mention anything specific. That I didn't get started earlier, I guess. I started kind of a late bloomer now.
But I think you needed all of your experiences.
Yeah.
To be able to have that heart that you have.
Yeah, I think so. But, I should have started younger, but didn't have the money or the ability or the resources to do that. So.
How do you want to be remembered, John?
How do I want to be remembered?
Yes.
Good question. I don't know. Just as someone who has helped this job to be better for these people that work this job. I suppose at my funeral, I'd like someone to say that this is what he did. He made the job better, and he devoted his life to that.
I'm writing it down.
I'm not ready to die yet, Steph, so don't.
You better not be. There's a research project that I really would like to be part of with you. Absolutely. No, but you have become the name in suicide prevention and in research, and that it is amazing. Have you ever thought of yourself and realized what you have done and how you are sought after?
No, I guess when I first found out about this problem, that was my impetus. That was my motivation. And, I don't feel that I'm anybody special. I'm just another researcher out there who is a cop. There's a lot of cop docs out there these days. And I'm just trying to do something to make things better. And if I can do that, I'm a happy soul. I never thought that I'd get to a point where, people all over the world are calling me up and asking me to give presentations and do things like that. I didn't expect that.
I always say that you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And you have been an amazing part of the solution.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
My God.
I just hope my work gets used. That's the most thing that's what I want the most. That when I put that stuff out there, that it's going to make a difference.
You are quoted everywhere, John. And I know that you are John. I know that I've never met a cop that ever believed that he was a hero. I know that for you, you're doing the work that you were meant to do. That you saw that there is a need and you have filled it. But I will tell you from somebody's point of view that has been on a very different side, that there's not an article, that it's not even a gold standard. There's a platinum standard, and the platinum standard is the Violanti standard.
Wow.
And it is really quite something. And I remember, one of my VP had said to me, if you can get a hold of Dr. Violanti, I'm like, I can do that. And it's just like, it's just amazing stuff. And it's such an honor, and you're such a humble man. And you've taught me so much about humility, about law enforcement, about how to do this right, and about dedication and never, ever giving up.
Let me say something to you. I think I like you because you're real. And I know there are people out there and counselors who are not. And you're a real person, and you talk to people like you're a real person. And that makes a big difference to the cops, because they don't want to go in to a counseling session and hear about theory. They don't want to know about this or that in research. They want to know if you understand the problem and how you can help them deal with that. And Steffi, you got that. And that makes you good.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Is there a question that I didn't ask, or anything that you want to say?
No, I just want to continue doing what I'm doing, and I hope you do. Continue on what you're doing and helping officers. When people call me up and they want to find a counselor in New Jersey, I always tell them to go see Steph.
Thanks, John.
I figured you need the business. No, not really.
I truly appreciate that. What a blessing.
I know you're busy. I know. I understand.
I
yeah.
appreciate that, and I appreciate you. When Copline was formed, just believing in the concept and being willing to be an honorary board member. I know that everybody asks you to be on whatever because your name holds weight, but
yeah.
But in the heart, I treasure that we're all just wanting to do the right thing, and it's take care of cops without really any agenda. Just let's get her done.
That's what it is. You and I both. I think that's what we're here for, and that's what we do. And maybe it helps us grow. Who knows?
No doubt. I say every day that I think I get more from them than they will ever get from me. So.
Okay, well, it's good talking to you, Steph.
John. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being willing to do this.
We'll see you again.
All right. Take care. Be safe.